Oh, this was a nightmare, shooting this, because Leo couldn't stop laughing, and we had to reshoot this about 4 times.
There are movies, and then there is Titanic. James Cameron's 1997 epic didn't just break box office records. It changed the lives of everyone who made it, particularly its 2 leading stars, Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. For years, the public has been fed a version of their relationship built on tabloid fantasy and carefully cropped photographs. But the real story, the one that lived in the cold water of a Mexican film studio tank, in whispered conversations between takes, in shared laughter over ruined makeup, is far more honest, far more complicated, and ultimately far more beautiful than anything the press ever invented. Kate Winslet has been gradually peeling back those layers for decades now, and what she has revealed paints a portrait of 2 young actors navigating something truly extraordinary together. So let's set the record straight and tell the story the way it actually happened. When Kate Winslet first walked onto the Titanic set, she knew she was stepping into something enormous. The production was already gaining a reputation for being a beast, over-budget, over-ambitious, and driven by a director whose standards left very little room for anything less than perfection. James Cameron had already doubled the original budget, pushing the film toward what was then the most expensive production in Hollywood history at $200 million. The pressure was embedded in every corner of that set before a single scene had been filmed. What Kate did not expect was Leonardo DiCaprio. She had, of course, known of him. Romeo and Juliet had made that impossible to avoid. But knowing of someone and actually working alongside them are entirely different things. In her own words to Rolling Stone, the moment she and DiCaprio met, something just clicked. She described the 2 of them as the 2 goofy kids on the set, a phrase that feels impossible to square with the sweeping romance that the world eventually saw on screen, but one that tells you everything about who they actually were to each other. DiCaprio, for his part, had not even wanted the role initially. Cameron himself later recalled that during early readings, Leonardo was difficult to pin down, goofing around, resistant to settling into the romantic material, reluctant to commit to a character he found perhaps too straightforward compared to the intense dramatic roles he gravitated toward. Cameron reportedly told him bluntly that he wasn't going to give Jack Dawson a limp or a neurotic tic, that he envisioned the character closer to the steady, heroic mold of James Stewart or Gregory Peck. That conversation shifted something in DiCaprio, and he came on board. The rest, as they say, is history. To Love With was built not on scripted romance but on genuine, organic friendship. Before the cameras rolled on any major scene, before Jack ever met Rose at the bow of that ship, 2 young actors were simply enjoying each other's company in the way that young people do, ribbing each other, making each other laugh, finding levity inside the pressure cooker the Titanic had become. The Titanic shoot lasted for months under conditions that tested everyone involved. Filming took place primarily at a massive purpose-built studio in Rosarito, Mexico, and included an enormous outdoor tank that held a near full-scale reconstruction of the ship. It was physically punishing work. Kate Winslet has spoken openly about the toll the production took on her body. She suffered hypothermia from the water scenes and at one harrowing moment nearly drowned on set. The water was cold, the hours were long, and Cameron's exacting eye meant that no scene was considered finished until it was genuinely right. It was inside this crucible that the friendship between Kate and Leonardo forged itself into something lasting. DiCaprio told Rolling Stone at the time, quite simply and quite sincerely, "She was my best friend for 7 months." He added, "We'd unload the stresses of the shoot to each other, vent to each other, watch out for each other." That phrase, "watch out for each other," says more than any romantic rumor ever could. These were 2 people doing genuinely difficult work in genuinely difficult conditions, and they chose to face it together. Kate has elaborated on what that looked like in practice. The 2 would do the most ridiculous things to each other, she recalled. Tickling, teasing, the kind of irreverent physical humor that develops between people who have spent too many hours together under too much stress and desperately need an outlet. Billy Zane, who played the villainous Cal Hockley in the film, later described DiCaprio's mission on set in characteristically blunt terms. Grossing Kate out was purely Leo's job. The image this conjures, of one of cinema's most celebrated romantic leads dedicating himself to making his co-star cringe, is a far cry from the smoldering Hollywood couple that gossip columns insisted on inventing. By the end of filming, their bond had grown into something that both of them recognized as rare. Kate has described Leonardo as her closest friend in the world on more than one occasion. DiCaprio, in turn, has repeatedly called her without hesitation his favorite actress in the industry. These are not the polite, managed compliments that celebrities offer in press junkets. They are declarations with weight behind them, earned through shared experience. One of the most honest windows into how Kate and Leonardo's relationship actually functioned on set comes from the details she has shared about specific scenes, the kind of granular, unglamorous truths that strip the myth away and leave the reality. Take the iconic kiss at the bow of the ship, the scene that generations of fans have swooned over, the one that exists in cultural memory as one of cinema's great romantic images. According to Kate, the reality of filming it was, in her own word, a mess. She has described the practical nightmare of shooting it in vivid detail. She was wearing a great deal of pale stage makeup, and with each take, as they kissed, DiCaprio's makeup would transfer onto her face, leaving her looking as though she had been sucking a caramel chocolate bar. Meanwhile, Leonardo was left with a conspicuous pale patch where her makeup had migrated onto him. Between takes, Kate had to perform makeup checks on both of them to restore the illusion before the next attempt. And through all of it, DiCaprio kept laughing. Cameron needed a very specific quality of light for the scene, and as the sunset kept shifting, they had to reshoot it approximately 4 times. "This was a nightmare," Kate has said. "Leo couldn't stop laughing." Then there is the famous door scene, arguably the most debated sequence in cinema history, the one where Rose floats on a piece of wreckage while Jack slips beneath the ocean. Fans have argued for decades about whether Jack could have fit on the door. What Kate revealed in 2024 at an advanced screening of her film is something rather more deflating to the myth. The tank in which they filmed that scene was only waist-high. And Leonardo DiCaprio, the man romantically sacrificing himself to the depths of the Atlantic Ocean on screen, was in fact kneeling. "Leo, I'm afraid to say, was kneeling down," she said, laughing, and immediately joking that James Cameron was going to call her for letting that slip. These details matter not because they diminish the film, the final result remains extraordinary, but because they reveal the texture of what it was actually like to make it. It was hard work, physically uncomfortable, technically demanding, and frequently absurd. And the two people at its center responded by laughing. It would be dishonest to tell this story without acknowledging the more complicated emotional territory Kate has alluded to over the years. She has been candid about the fact that going into the production, she was genuinely worried. Working with DiCaprio, young, charming, undeniably magnetic, she was concerned that the intensity of the work and the intimacy it required might blur into something she hadn't bargained for. She was worried, in her own words, about being bowled over by him. What she found instead, almost immediately, was that the two of them simply clicked in a way that felt more like siblings than anything else. The friendship was real and immediate, and it had a quality that she later described as making any romantic involvement feel, bluntly, incestual. They were too close, too genuinely fond of each other in the irreverent way of close friends, for it to tip into anything else. And yet, Kate has acknowledged, in that same Rolling Stone interview from 1998, that the emotional intensity of filming the more intimate scenes carried its own particular weight. The craftsmanship required of both actors meant accessing something genuine, and when the cameras stopped rolling, that feeling didn't evaporate instantly. She admitted that after filming the intimacy required of certain scenes, there was a residual emotional charge that took a moment to shake off. This is not a confession of romantic feeling, it is a description of what serious acting demands of the people doing it, and the degree to which Kate was honest about that experience says something important about her relationship with her own craft. DiCaprio was not in a relationship with Winslet during filming. He was linked to model Kristen Zong through 1997, and their lives away from the set were entirely separate. The point is not romance. The point is that two people doing deeply emotional, physically demanding work together, over a period of many months, inevitably create something between them that is not easy to categorize. Kate has never tried to force it into a simple box, and that honesty is part of what makes her accounts of this period feel authentic. No story about the making of Titanic is complete without understanding the environment that James Cameron created on set, because that environment shaped everything about how Kate and Leonardo related to each other and to the work. Cameron was not a gentle director. His standards were exacting in the extreme, and his budget overruns. The film went from a $100 million production to a $200 million one, reflected the degree to which he refused to compromise on his vision. Kate has described the physical demands as genuinely dangerous at times. Hypothermia was not a dramatic flourish, it was a documented consequence of the waterwork. There was a period during production when she almost drowned. These were real conditions with real stakes, and they created a bond between the cast and crew that had nothing to do with glamour and everything to do with shared survival. What Cameron also created, almost inadvertently, was a situation in which the two lead actors had to trust each other completely. The scenes that demanded the most from them, the cold, the physical strain, the emotional rawness, required that they had each other's backs. DiCaprio, for his part, became someone Kate genuinely relied on during the harder stretches. He was, she has said, steady in the moments when steadiness was needed. He was also, and this is important, capable of making her laugh at exactly the right moment. The film also asked both of them to carry something enormous with relatively little experience of doing so at this scale. DiCaprio had been considered for the role after Cameron screened several other candidates, and Winslet herself had campaigned aggressively for the part of Rose, sending Cameron daily notes from England and eventually calling him on his mobile to plead her case. When he finally cast her, she sent him a single rose with a card, "From your Rose." These were not passive people waiting to be discovered. They arrived on that set having fought for the opportunity, and that shared hunger for the material was part of what made their dynamic work. Almost from the moment Titanic was released, the press constructed a narrative about Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio that bore a limited relationship to the truth. The suggestion of an off-screen romance was irresistible to tabloids, fed by their on-screen chemistry and the frequency of their public appearances together at awards shows and premieres. The story wrote itself, or rather, it was written for them, repeatedly, without their consent. Kate has been measured but clear in her pushback against this version of events. She has spoken about the frustration of having a working relationship, one defined by craft, friendship, trust, and hard-won mutual respect, reduced to gossip column speculation. It created a strange kind of cognitive dissonance. The world believed it knew what was between them, and what it believed bore almost no resemblance to reality. What she has consistently offered in place of that narrative is something more interesting and more truthful. The bond that she and DiCaprio developed over those months of filming was real, but its nature was not romantic. It was the bond of two people who had been through something genuinely difficult together, who had made each other laugh when laughter was the only available remedy, and who had discovered in each other a kind of friendship that the passage of time has only deepened. She has spoken about how even in recent years, if she is in crisis, DiCaprio is one of the first people she calls, and he picks up. Phone me," she has said, describing how she reached out to him not long ago during a difficult moment, and how he responded immediately. That is not the behavior of co-stars maintaining a polite professional relationship. That is friendship of a particular and rare kind, built on a foundation that the public never fully got to see. In the decade since Titanic, both Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio have built careers of remarkable range and depth. DiCaprio, conscious of the risk of typecasting after playing the quintessential romantic hero, made a series of choices that deliberately pushed him into darker, more complex territory. American Psycho, Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed, The Revenant, for which he finally won his long-awaited Oscar.